Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Lillian, and here I share stories, thoughts, and moments from my friends. The moment that woman called my daughter a country girl, right there in the middle of her toast, wine glass held like a dagger, I knew I'd never forgive her, not for saying it, not for meaning it, but for doing it with a smile. It wasn't even her words that hit the hardest. It was the way she glanced sideways at Emily, my daughter, my whole world, and added, "Of course, we've put the apartment solely in Ryan's name. Just a little precaution, you understand. These things don't always last." The clink of champagne flutes around the room didn't hide the silence that followed. It was a vacuum, heavy, paralyzing, the kind of silence that makes your palms sweat and your ears ring. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the faint buzz of the band waiting to start the next song. Emily didn't flinch. God bless her! She sat straight in her dress, the one we stitched together on weekends over the past year, the bodice she'd sewn by hand. Her smile was faint, tight at the corners, but she didn't look down. She didn't cry. That made it worse somehow, because I knew her, and I could feel the heat behind her eyes, the way she was willing herself to hold the damn line. Ryan, the groom, the man she'd waited 5 years for, didn't say a word. He looked at his mother with a kind of dumb blankness. Not even surprise, just quiet, complicit stillness. I felt something rip in me. Not anger, not yet. More like grief. The quiet, painful kind that sneaks up on you when you realize the world isn't fair, and sometimes the people you love won't protect you. My name is Richard Callahan. I'm 57. I've been a long-haul truck driver for 31 years. I've hauled everything from apples to steel beams, crossed 38 states, and buried 2 brothers. I've seen dawn break over the Rockies and snow fall flat and grey over Iowa rest stops. But nothing in all those miles prepared me for watching my daughter get humiliated like that. In her white dress, surrounded by people too rich and too polite to say a word. Emily was always mine in the quiet way a daughter belongs to her father, not in ownership, but in trust. Her mother, Lila, passed when Emily was just 12. An aneurysm, sudden and cruel. One minute she was humming at the sink, the next she was gone. Emily didn't cry much then, she just went quiet for a long time. I did my best. I was on the road most weeks, but I came back for every piano recital, every parent-teacher night, every scraped knee. We built a life with what we had. She was smart. God, was she smart. But she never made me feel small. Even when she got into college on a scholarship and started using words I had to look up. She stayed soft. She stayed kind. She still called me every Sunday, still asked about the truck, still sent photos of pies she'd baked from scratch because, "I thought you'd be proud, Daddy." Then came Ryan. I'll admit it. I didn't love him. Not from the start. Too polished, too smooth. The kind of handshake that says, "I've never done a hard day's work in my life." But he made Emily laugh, and that counted for something. And I watched her with him. She tried so hard not to impress. No, she wasn't like that. But to belong. She learned wine pairings. She went to charity auctions. She bought a navy dress she said looked sophisticated enough for his mother's birthday brunch. When she came home for Thanksgiving, she barely touched the stuffing, said she was watching her carbs. Emily never watched her carbs. And then, when they got engaged, she asked me if I'd walk her down the aisle, as if there was anyone else, as if I wouldn't. "I know they want a big wedding," she said, folding a napkin in her lap like she was prepping for battle. "I know it's going to be formal." "You don't owe them anything, kid," I said. "I know." But her voice was small. "But Ryan's mum, she means well. She just comes from a different world." That's the phrase people use when they're trying not to say she thinks we're beneath her. Different world. The wedding was held at a country club upstate, a converted estate with stone terraces, overpriced hors d'oeuvres, and servers who looked like they'd just graduated from modelling school. Emily had insisted on a few touches that were hers: local flowers, a folk trio playing during cocktail hour, a dessert table with my mother's apple pie recipe instead of a fancy wedding cake. I stood near the back for most of it, keeping quiet. I'm not much for crowds. Wore my best grey suit, freshly pressed, and a tie Emily had given me 2 years ago that I usually saved for church. When it came time for the toasts, Caroline, Ryan's mother, stood with her diamond earrings catching the light, her voice clear and elegant as she spoke of legacy, family, tradition. And then came that line, that goddamn line. "Of course, the apartment is in Ryan's name. Just a little precaution. These things don't always last." A few people shifted in their chairs. No one said a word. Emily didn't look at me, but her shoulders squared just slightly, like she knew I was watching. I was. I always was. And I rose. I didn't plan to. I hadn't written a speech. I didn't have notes or a flute of champagne. Just a dry throat, a heavy heart, and 31 years of steel and road and silence built up in my chest. I walked to the mic. Emily turned her head, barely, and when her eyes met mine, I saw it. The fear that I'd make it worse, that I'd say something coarse or clumsy, that I'd embarrass her. So I smiled, just for her, and then I spoke. "I'm Richard Callahan," I said, clearing my throat. "I'm Emily's father. Most of you don't know me. That's all right. I'm not big on parties." A few polite chuckles. I ignored them. "I'm a trucker. Been one most of my life. It's not a glamorous job. Doesn't come with champagne or speeches. But it's honest work. You see a lot from the road. You learn what lasts, and what doesn't." I looked at Emily. She hadn't moved, just watched me with her lips pressed tight, her hands folded in her lap. "I didn't come here to talk about apartments or prenups or who owns what. I came here to talk about my daughter." I paused, let the silence hold. "She's the most loyal, hard-working, kind person I know. She doesn't look down on anyone. She doesn't try to impress. She just shows up. Every time. She's been doing that since she was 12, and I'm proud of her. Not because of how she looks or who she married, but because of who she is." I looked at Ryan then. His face was pale. "She deserves a home, not just a place with walls, but a place where she's safe, where she's valued. So I want to give her something." People leaned forward. Whispers. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the envelope. "This is the deed to the house I built after her mother died. It's not a penthouse. It's got creaky floors and a backyard that floods every spring. But it's solid, and it's hers, in her name. No conditions, no expectations, just love." A gasp, audible. Someone clapped, then someone else, then more. Emily's hands were over her mouth. Caroline, for the first time that evening, looked lost. Ryan stood, walked toward me, and for a second I braced. I thought maybe he'd protest, maybe he'd try to apologize. But he just took the mic and said simply, "Thank you. I needed to hear that." He turned to Emily. "And I'm sorry." And with that, the whole room shifted, like a dam broke. We left the wedding before dessert, not storming out, not in shame, just done. Emily held her bouquet in one hand, my arm in the other. The moment the music started back up and people turned back to their drinks, I leaned in and asked quietly, "You want to stay?" She shook her head once, hard. No. Ryan followed us outside. He'd already taken off his tuxedo jacket and looked younger without it. Less like his mother's son, more like a guy who might just deserve her. I drove them to the house myself. My truck wasn't fancy, just a dusty Dodge I kept in good shape, but I knew every bump on that road like an old hymn. Emily sat in the back seat, veil off, shoes off, knees curled under her. Ryan rode up front with me, silent. When we got to the driveway, the porch light I'd left on made the white paint of the house glow warm. I'd stained the door myself, dark cedar, built that porch railing by hand after Lila passed, trying to keep my hands busy so the grief wouldn't swallow me whole. "This place is beautiful," Ryan said softly. "It's real," I replied. "Nothing fancy, but it stands." Emily stepped out of the truck like she'd come home after a long, hard journey. She walked up the steps, hand brushing the railing, and I could see her shoulders drop a little, not with disappointment, with relief. She turned back to me. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything, kid. Just be happy here." That night, I slept on the old couch in the guest room, gave them the master bedroom. It was theirs now, after all. I lay there listening to the crickets outside and the low murmur of their voices upstairs. I couldn't catch the words, but it was the sound of honesty, or maybe beginning. In the morning, Emily was in the kitchen, barefoot, hair messy, frying eggs. "Dad," she said, her voice tight with sleep and something else, maybe disbelief. "You really meant it, didn't you?" "I always do." She crossed the room and hugged me hard. I held her like I used to when she was little, before the world taught her to brace for cruelty disguised as class. The days that followed weren't magical. Real life never is. There were long conversations between her and Ryan. He didn't go back to his apartment, didn't call his mother, far as I knew. He stayed at the house, mowing the lawn, fixing a broken gutter, helping Emily rearrange the living room like it was the Paris showroom of her dreams, only with a Home Depot budget. They had fights. Of course they did. One night, I overheard them arguing on the porch, her voice sharp, his low and defensive. "You just let her say that about me, Ryan." I panicked. I didn't know what she was going to say. "But you didn't stop her. You never stop her." A long silence. "I know," he finally said, "but I will now." I almost stepped outside, almost made it my business, but then I heard her say, "Don't make promises, just show me." So I stayed inside, poured myself a whiskey, turned up the ball game. The house began to change with them in it. Emily hung curtains she'd thrifted, painted the bathroom a shade of blue I thought looked like toothpaste, but she called serene. Ryan started a little herb garden in the back, even though we both knew the soil wasn't great. And one Sunday, he followed me to the garage, rolled up his sleeves and said, "Teach me? To drive a rig?" He laughed. "To use a drill? To build something, anything." So I handed him a hammer. We started with a new fence post, then a bench for the front yard, then a shed door, and little by little I started seeing the man beneath the polish. It wasn't long before Caroline called. Not Emily, not Ryan, me. I almost didn't answer, but I recognized the area code, and some part of me wanted to hear what she'd sound like days later when the cameras were off and the guests were gone. "Richard," she began, voice as smooth as ever, "I suppose congratulations are in order." I said nothing. She went on. "I must admit I didn't expect that performance at the wedding. You humiliated my daughter in front of 100 people. "I was making a prudent decision," she snapped. "There's a reason families with assets protect them. Is there also a reason they treat their future daughter-in-law like she's disposable?" Silence. Then, "I wanted to call and say I'm sorry for how things unfolded. I may have been unkind. I can see that now." I let the quiet stretch until it was uncomfortable. "I'd like to visit," she said. "Speak with them. Apologize properly." "They're not ready," I replied. "Well, when will they be?" I didn't answer, because that wasn't mine to say. A week later, Ryan invited her to lunch. Neutral ground. A diner, not far from town. Emily didn't go. I didn't either. But Ryan came home with a look on his face that told me everything I needed to know. It had been hard. He didn't share details, just said, "She's trying, but I don't know if she gets it." "She won't," I said gently. "Not all the way, but maybe she'll respect it." He nodded. "I hope so. I'm not going back, if that's what she wants. I want to build something here." Emily didn't say much that evening. She baked a pie instead. The smell filled the house. Cinnamon and apples and that rich, buttery crust only she could get right. After dinner, she sat beside me on the porch and said, "I'm not mad anymore. Not at her." "No?" "Number, I'm just tired of pretending I need to prove I belong. I belong here. That's enough." I looked at her then, cheeks flushed, hair pulled back, eyes soft but clear. "You always did," I said. The months passed, and they stayed. They didn't buy a bigger house. They didn't take the apartment back. Ryan found work at a local firm. Emily opened a small floral studio downtown, called it Fox and Fern, said it sounded like a place people could breathe. It did well, too. Word spread. Brides came in. Retirees bought arrangements just to feel seen. Emily always said flowers were never about status. They were about attention, care, the way you notice what someone needs. She told me once, "People think revenge is about fire, but sometimes it's about roots, about growing where you weren't expected to." That stayed with me. So did the way Caroline eventually came, not to the house, but to the shop. She bought a bouquet for a charity event, left her card, didn't linger. Emily didn't comment. She just trimmed the stems and handed them over with a smile. It was about 8 months after the wedding when I noticed the shift, not just in Emily, but in Ryan too. They had learned to be still in their own skin. You have to understand, when people are raised to perform, to achieve, to impress, to pass silent tests of worth, they forget how to just be. Ryan had always seemed like he was scanning a room for cues, trying to adjust himself to expectations invisible to the rest of us. Emily, too, for a while, watching her words, softening her accent, curating her life so it wouldn't be mocked by polished strangers with estate jewelry and wine cellars. But now I'd find them barefoot on the porch on Saturday mornings, coffee in mismatched mugs, talking about irrigation for the tomatoes. I'd catch Ryan repainting the shutters because the old green looks like algae, or Emily at the kitchen table sketching bouquet ideas on napkins. Once she painted a mural on the garage wall, just a spray of wildflowers winding upward like they were reaching toward the sun. And one Sunday afternoon they invited me to dinner, just the three of us. Emily had made roasted chicken with rosemary from their garden. Ryan had baked bread, from scratch. And in that little dining room with the uneven floorboards and the crooked lamp, something clicked. This was their home, no longer borrowed, no longer gifted, no longer dependent on anyone's approval. The house was becoming an extension of them, honest, warm, real. But life, of course, has a way of tugging at peace. One rainy Monday, I stopped by the floral shop to drop off some lumber Emily had asked for. They were expanding the back room. She wanted a spot for workshops, she said. People need space to make beauty with their own hands. As I stepped inside, I heard raised voices, not angry, just sharp. You could have told me she'd be here, Emily was saying. I didn't know until this morning, Ryan replied. I stayed near the doorway, silent. Showing up to my shop uninvited? That's not an apology, that's control. She said she was trying. Ryan, Emily's voice dropped. She's still playing chess. I'm not on the board anymore. A beat. Then footsteps. Ryan appeared around the corner, saw me. Oh, he said. Hey, Richard, she's gone now. Emily followed behind him. Her eyes met mine. She wasn't crying, but she looked tired. I set the wood down and asked, Want me to stay and help? She shook her head. Number, I just need a minute. And then she hugged me, brief but firm. That's when I knew, whatever storm Caroline was trying to summon, Emily had already found her shelter. Ryan didn't cut off his mother completely. I didn't expect him to. There were still calls, occasional visits. But they became cordial, not close, controlled. Caroline never set foot in the house again, though she sent gifts, a Vitamix blender, a Le Creuset pot, an embossed photo album with a note, for future generations. Emily never used the pot. She donated it to the women's shelter. She said, I'd rather feed someone who actually needs it. The next summer, Emily threw a block party. Nothing fancy, just folding chairs, lemonade, pulled pork sandwiches, and a dozen neighbours swapping stories in the yard. I brought my old grill out of retirement. Ryan handled music. Kids ran wild with chalk and water balloons. At one point, I saw Emily kneeling beside a woman in her 70s, helping her tie a bouquet of snapdragons. They were laughing. I took a photo of that moment, printed it out, framed it, gave it to her a week later. Why this one? She asked. Because that's who you are, I said. Not someone standing in a ballroom trying to prove herself, someone kneeling in the grass, making beauty with a stranger. She cried a little. Then she baked a pie. Again. In late fall, Emily was invited to speak at a local college. The horticulture department was running a series on sustainable floristry, and someone had seen her workshop flyer at the library. She was nervous. She printed her notes 3 times, practiced in front of the mirror. Do you think I'm enough? She asked me the night before. You've always been enough, I said. The world's just finally noticing. The auditorium wasn't big, maybe 50 students. But she stood there, strong and clear, talking about soil, memory, the language of flowers. She quoted her mother. She mentioned roots again, said, We don't choose where we're planted, but we choose how we grow. People clapped for a long time. Caroline didn't call, but Ryan's father, a quiet man who'd always followed his wife's lead, sent an email that night. I watched the live stream. I'm proud of her. You raised a hell of a daughter. I printed that out too, slipped it between pages of Emily's old sketchbook. Near the end of that year, Ryan finally said it. I want to take your last name. We were on the porch. Emily had gone inside for tea. He sat beside me, hands clasped. She gave me everything, he said. A life, a home, clarity, and she did it without asking for anything back. You don't need my blessing for that, I said. I know, but I wanted you to know. So Ryan Callahan was printed on the next business card batch for Fox and Fern. Co-owner, operations manager, partner in every sense. Caroline sent a terse email. "This feels unnecessary," Emily replied. "It's not about you anymore." It was a quiet revenge, really. No screaming matches, no lawsuits, no dramatic slaps in public. Just the long, deliberate decision to live well and without permission. To build something that couldn't be revoked with a trust fund or a lawyer's letter. To create joy that didn't require a gate code or a pedigree. And in the end, that made all the difference. I'm writing this from the same porch where it all began. The wood creaks under my chair, and the early evening light paints long shadows across the yard. The rosemary bush is overgrown. The shutters need repainting again. A bird's nest sits snugly in the rafters above the porch swing, and the woman who was once called a country girl just drove off in a second-hand pickup truck with a dozen hand-tied centerpieces in the back, headed to a wedding where her work will be the highlight of someone else's happiest day. She waved when she passed. Same smile as always, but different now, wiser, quieter, rooted. Emily's pregnant. 3 months, just far enough along to start glowing, but not quite past the nausea. Ryan's read every book he can find, built a crib from scratch, and cries every time he looks at the ultrasound. They told me over dinner, casually, like it wasn't the biggest thing in the world. "We wanted to wait," Emily said, chewing on her thumb, eyes sparkling. "Wait for what?" I asked, pretending not to already suspect. "For it to feel real," she said. "But it does now. I think this house made it real." I swallowed the lump in my throat and said the only thing I could. "Your mama would have been so proud." Caroline eventually came around in her own way. She started sending handwritten letters. They were stiff at first, then softer. She asked to visit. Emily didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either. One afternoon, they met at a cafe halfway between towns. No one brought up the wedding. No one brought up the apartment. They just talked, like people, like women. Later, Emily told me, "She's not who I need her to be, but she's trying." That in itself was enough. Not forgiveness, not forgetfulness, but a kind of peace. A year after the wedding, Emily and Ryan renewed their vows, this time barefoot, behind the house, under an arch Ryan built himself. It was a small group, neighbours, a few old friends. I wore my church tie again, and Emily walked down the gravel path with her belly full and her dress blowing in the breeze. She didn't carry roses or orchids. She held wildflowers, sun-warmed and irregular and beautiful, and when Ryan saw her, he cried the way men cry when they realize they almost lost the best thing they'll ever know. I didn't give a speech. Didn't need to. The house was the speech. The soil, the porch, the worn couch, the mural on the garage, the shelf of handmade ceramics, the dozens of dried bouquets pressed between books, the kitchen floor squeak, the creak of stairs, the sound of laughter through thin walls. It all said the only thing that mattered. This is hers. We planted a tree in the backyard the day their daughter was born. Emily picked a redbud, said it blooms in spring like a secret finally spoken aloud. They named her Lila. I dug the hole. Ryan held the roots steady. Emily covered them with soil, pressed down with her palms. "She'll grow here," Emily whispered. "She'll always know this is where she came from." And that's when I realized revenge doesn't always look like vengeance. Sometimes it looks like legacy. The first time Lila toddled through the garden, barefoot and wild-haired, she plucked a daisy and held it out to me like treasure. "For Papa," she said, and I took it, and I cried, quietly, because I remembered the silence of that ballroom, the clink of flutes, the weight of humiliation hanging in the air, the way Emily looked at me, hoping I'd say something, anything, to remind her she was worth more than gold-plated insults. And now, here we were, 3 generations on the same soil, no chandeliers, no status games, just a home full of laughter, and a little girl with dirt on her knees offering love without condition. I often think about what would have happened if I hadn't stood up that night, if I'd stayed silent, if I'd let the money talk louder than the love. But I didn't. And because of that, my daughter never had to question her worth again. She never had to shrink herself to fit someone else's idea of class. She never had to ask permission to be proud. She just lived, fully, boldly, tenderly, with roots deep and flowers fierce. And I got to watch her bloom.